Okay, so to get their engagement, I make it quite fun. It's not a serious conversation, although it can be, but I make it light and fun, especially in those first few sessions. And the main thing I think as advice is you talk about what they want to talk about. It's very rare that they get in a one to one with an adult where they're asking them, "How are you?" rather than "What haven't you done?" or "What do you need to do?" There's always a hidden agenda. And as soon as they know, "Oh, you're just asking me how I am and what I think about things and what I feel about things, and you're asking me to self reflect," they really like it, because where else do you get to talk about yourself for an hour with no one trying to move you in a direction that has pressure on it or makes you have to achieve something. So I think it once they know and trust you, it's building up trust to get them to engage with you, making it fun, being a bit funny. That the best advice I can give you is you talk about what they want to talk about.
One thing that's really important is being on time, turning up, being reliable. So you're not the one that's not there, you know. You have to be kind of that rock so that, yeah, it just helps, it makes you reliable, you have integrity, so they're more likely to trust. I'd say have a chat with them, find things in common. Don't just dive straight in with the issue that's kind of that they want to work on, or issues. So what you can also do is create an agreement at the beginning between you both about what you'd expect from each other, what you'd expect from yourselves in that relationship moving forward. And yeah, and if it comes from them, not just you, it's important to kind of listen, to be open, to be on time, to be respectful, all these things, whatever, and it'll be different. Whatever comes up for them is great, but you can add things too about what you expect. So I think that's a really important way of doing it. And rapport, getting into rapport with them, pacing their body language, their use of voice, so you can kind of get into their world a little bit is going to help them to engage as well, I think.
Okay, so parental consent is part of the contract. So if I'm working in my own business, that's written down in the contract with the parents. I need the parent's signature. I also say for young people under 16 that there's a parent in the house but not in the room, so that they know we're having the Zoom or the whatever session we're having. I use ethical guidelines from my governing body or from the company or charity that I'm working for. I'd use their guidelines, and so with Worth It, it's Association of Coaching, isn't it? So I use their ethical guidelines. I might speak to the parents about how well the sessions are going. So I might say to them something like, "Oh, we had a really good session, thank you, and here's the next one." But I never disclose what's gone on in the session, or it's completely confidential, unless, of course, you'd be going on those ethical guidelines if they're going to hurt themselves or something like that. But I make that very, very clear to the young person. And you will get parents who ask you, "Or have they said anything about this, or have they said anything about that?" And you don't get into that at all, because it has to be the young person's session. But also be aware, you need to be really empathic to the parents, because you're probably their hope, and just telling them that they've had a good session or they were really engaged in the session and it was lovely just gives that parent real reassurance as well that something's moving forward for their child.
There are a few things they might want to be reassured that their child is going to be safe. They might also have things that they want out of the session, or they more than likely do. So I'd explain that the process is confidential unless I hear that someone's at risk, the safeguarding aspect of it. And yeah, and obviously informing the young person of that same thing. That I'd ask the parent what they would know about coaching already, and sort of clarify the differences with other approaches and the similarities, what they would want them to get from the process. And because it might be the same or it might be different from what the young person wants. And then clarify expectations on that. If it's realistic, then clarify that. And if it's not, then say, okay, well, yeah, perhaps this is what we're aiming for at first instead, and then perhaps later on they can achieve that, just so it's all achievable and everybody knows that. It's also really important to get consent if they're under 18, so a signed consent from the parent. And they, whether or not, give them both the choice for their parent to be present or not. And if they're not present, that's fine, but that needs to be part of the consent, that it's okay to work with your child, and you won't be directly present. Even if that's the case, what I like to do is I like to ensure that that parent is very close by, in the next room with the door open, even if you're doing it digitally, even if you're doing it online, they're around. And I think that'll help them both to relax.
I think I kind of answered that in the last question. It's really just being aware of their surroundings and making sure that safety in that they know they can talk as well, and really watching them, because sometimes you'll see them looking to one side and there'll be somebody in the room or someone's come into the room. I'm talking about when you're doing it online now, and so you have to say to them, is someone in the room? We'll just pause that bit a minute, because they're frightened of interrupting you, but they also don't want to say, oh, so and so's in here, because it looks like they're talking about something bad about that person. So be really aware of their body language and make sure that no one's come in the room. And just, safety of one of my bugbears is GDPR. I write my notes on an iPad and I have a fingerprint on that, but before that I had paper and it's in a locked drawer, and I rip up anything with their names on so it's destroyed. So just making sure that everything's confidential, you've covered all those GDPR things, but you're also just aware of the surroundings behind them in the house as well. And as well, if in a session, if you're doing it in a school or something like that, just be aware of where your room is, because you can tell as well when they're not talking openly and freely, because they know where that room is and they know who's next door. So if anyone's come in next door, just been really aware of, should we just take a break now just until that person's gone? So just being aware and making them feel that they're safe to talk.
Again, talking about consent, it's important to get a signed consent for anyone under 18. Explain to the young person that they're in control. They don't need to talk about anything they don't want to. They can stop the sessions whenever they want, and they don't have to answer any questions. Basically, they get to choose. And I think it's important to keep yourself safe as well. Like, you need to feel that you are able to help, that you're confident going into it, basically. If you need to get support, if you need to get coaching from a peer or something like that, then absolutely do that. I think that's a really good thing to do. And it's really important to have some kind of ongoing support where you can share with other peers or supervisors about your experiences, and anything that affects you. If anything kind of, I don't know, if anything just makes you feel a little bit like out of sorts, let's say, about any experiences you're having, it's really important to get that out and to talk with someone else that you trust about it, to sit with those feelings, with those experiences, and to understand more about yourself. And when you do that, you grow as a coach anyway. Just got to be completely honest with yourself, completely open, and get support, get help, and it only makes you a better coach, and it benefits everyone.
So often it's dictated by the person who's hired you to be the coach. So they might tell you how many sessions you've had. So you need to work out how you're going to use those in the most effective way. It's the timing of whether you want to do, say, 30 to an hour. I choose for young people generally about 45 minutes. I think anything over 45 minutes, in my experience, is far too much. And don't be frightened of changing that. Don't be frightened of stopping at 35, because you can tell they've had enough. That's it really. Oh, my top tip as well with timing is make sure you've got padding time around it, especially if you're doing it online, because they might not turn up, the Zoom might go down or whatever they're using. And also if you're coaching in schools, finding them, getting them to get to the room. So make sure you've planned plenty of time around that 45 minutes that you've set yourself for the coaching. So I always go with a little file that felt like a safety net when I was first coaching. I thought, I've got to have my sheets with me. So you've got something to do in the session. But as you get more confident, you don't rely on those as much. I would still take a few with them, because it's nice for them to do something in the session if they're feeling a bit quieter. I always start with the partnership agreement that we've decided. So just to remind them the things that we decided would go on in that room. Probably by the time you get third or fourth session, I wouldn't need to do that. Again, I'm dictated by what they want to do. So, and the mood that they're in. So I might say to them, oh, do you remember last time we were talking about strengths? Shall we have a look at your strengths this week and, do a mind map or do whatever worksheet or whatever you want to use or whatever method, you will change it for the child. So you might use cards for one person. I'm finding that so many young people are loving drawing. So when I'm doing strengths now, I give them options of, do you want to draw it out? Do you want to do that at home and bring it back? Just tap into whatever they want to use. You don't have to stick to the worksheets, but they are really useful to get those conversations going if at first, they're not very forthcoming. So I really, again, planning a session, you have the worksheets with you, but you can't properly plan it because you have to build a session on what they bring to the session with them, what they want to talk about. So you might not even use your worksheets, but they might want to go through one, or you might say, I'm really suggesting this worksheet, and you might have time to do half of it. It's really hard to plan it, and with confidence, that kind of you get used to doing that and you become more flexible. In the first stage, I'd say just have 5 or 6 worksheets, and then you can pull out the one that's appropriate in that session would be my best advice. As well as planning the session, I think it's really important to, when they've left the room, right there and then quickly reflect on how it went. So you'll know yourself, you might have made a mistake, so you might have not left a silence and you might have interrupted them with a question, and you think to yourself, if I'd have just stayed quiet, then what would have happened? Or you might have stayed quiet so long and noticed that they looked a little bit uncomfortable. So I always do a quick reflection right there and then before I either get in the car or turn my screen off and do something else. Reflect there and then, and that is always part of my planning, because it generally in that moment is when I know what I'd like to work on next session.
When I first started, I would have, and I still do really, I still have a little folder of content available with various different resources that I can use with young people. And I don't always use that now because I've just kind of assimilated lots of different approaches, and I just like, yep, that's the one to use. And it doesn't take too long before you're there as well. But I think it's good to have available lots of different things that you can do. So if you're stuck, you're like, I think this is going to work with your situation. But I think the important thing not to do is to think before a session, we're going to do this, we're going to use this tool with this person, and it's going to have this effect. So it's important to be present, to really listen, to be aware with that person so that you can hear, you can understand what's going on for them, and then you can choose the right approach on the basis of what comes out of that.
I try to find common ground with them, just having a chat. And if they are disengaging, I just ask them why, simple. You don't really seem into this today. You okay? You want to talk about it? Is this helping you? And they're generally very honest, but ask them the question why you just don't seem to be here today. Very happy always to say, look, should we give it a break for a couple of weeks and then see if you want to come back then? Don't be frightened of that. It's really hard. It's easy to say, isn't it? Don't take it personally, but actually, it's not personal. It might not just be the right time for them to talk about things, but it's always it's putting them in control. They don't have to come for it. I did have one young man, without breaking his confidentiality, but he really didn't want to do it, and he'd been forced by the school to come for coaching, and he used to come in every week and just sit like that, and so I'm not talking to you, and I'd go, all right then, because he had to come. So that was my most difficult one, and eventually we had a really lovely, warm relationship, and by the time the end of his 6 sessions were up that he had to do, he sheepishly asked if he could have a couple more, and I see him now. I see him in my hometown, and he's a grown man. He just gives me that knowing look. But we had a really lovely relationship. But I worked for about four weeks to get that relationship because he just She didn't want to be there. And that's hard. Shouldn't really be coaching someone who doesn't want to be there. But the nature of how schools work, that sometimes happens. So yeah, thinking about how do I feel when they disengage. I'll be honest, it's really hard. That first 4 weeks with the young man I was talking about, it was really, really hard. And did I take it personally? A little bit. I kind of, we're all human. What could I have done differently? Is it me? Can someone else have helped him? And that's always an option. Someone else can help them. But that's why you have a supervisor. You take it back to your supervisor. You say, "Oh, I feel really hurt. They weren't engaging." And my hardest one was the girl who wouldn't talk, but she wanted to be there, but she absolutely wouldn't talk at all. So her answer to every question was, "I'm not sure. I'm not sure." Every single answer. And that was really hard mentally for me. If I'm really honest, which I was honest with my supervisor, I really dreaded going and had to use everything in me to put this nice, friendly, bubbly act on. But again, she did make some real progress, but it was really, really hard work. So yeah, my feelings around that were kind of disappointment, frustration, but all of those emotions, write them down in your reflection afterwards and be brutally honest, like you asked your coachees to be, obviously so no one can see them, and then take that to the supervisor, your supervisor, and say, "I felt angry, I felt frustrated, I felt useless, I felt, all those things," and talk it out. Because otherwise, if you're not honest, you can't be a coach, I don't think, because your supervisor's coaching you, so you need to have something to take to them and be really, really honest about your feelings. So for this course, you can take those kinds of situations to your peer learning groups. And when I was on my coaching course, that's just reminded me actually, we used to go in triads afterwards and just talking about it through with other people and what they might have done or what they felt, and just hearing yourself say some of those things out loud about, "Oh, I didn't feel confident," or "I felt that I wasn't doing the right thing." And they'll reassure you as well, because we're all learning together, the coach, the coachee, and your fellow students. So yeah, use that on the course. It's really, really useful.
There might be a few different ways in which they disengage. So if they are late or if they sort of don't arrive at the session, you'd contact the person with either parental responsibility or who's organising it, and maybe like 10 or 15 minutes into the session, because it might just be that they're a little bit late, and just, yeah, that's it really. If they are there but they don't seem to be engaging, they're a bit distant or something like that, don't just bombard them with questions hoping to get something out of them. They are there through their own choice, and make sure that they know that as well. And they can, end the session if ever they want to end it. It's up to them. I would say that, yeah, like sort of going back to that point, if they are seem quite difficult to engage in terms of you asking a lot of questions and you're not getting a lot back, I would just hold back on the questions until they initiate an engagement. A lot of it needs to be generated by them. So yeah, there's no shame in just even leaving silence, not saying anything, not doing anything. If that's what they're doing, you could kind of match their rapport and the way they use their voice, until maybe they'll just get bored and say something and ask something. And again, you don't need to just dive in with the issue at hand. You might just want to talk about anything that they might have in common with you, their interests, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I suppose a lot of that you would do, yeah, from the very beginning, and then hopefully, if you're doing that sort of thing, they wouldn't disengage anyway. But if they do, there's always a way you can kind of pick it up again.
Yeah, endings are really important. And I think what we have to remember with young people is we're just a very small part of their week. So I give them plenty of notice. So let's say they book 6 sessions, on 4 sessions, I will be saying to them, "You've only got 2 sessions left now. So anything you feel we really need to bring into those 2 sessions, let's do it now." It's what they call that door handle moment, isn't it? When they bring everything to the last 5 minutes of a session, or to the very last session you're going to do. So I make sure I keep giving them notice that you've only got a couple of sessions left now. And I also encourage them that they're good to go, so if there isn't an ending, if a school hasn't or anyone hasn't booked 6 sessions, I'll say to them, "I really think we're at a stage now where you're good to go. where you're good to go and try out some of these tools and strategies that we've worked on. How do you feel about that? And then they'll tell you, well, I think my confidence is up a bit, or I think this, or I still need to work on this. So if there's no proper ending, they're telling you what they still feel they need themselves. But there has to be a little bit of an encouragement to go and try what you've been doing together. Or you can set that up as a small task as well before the actual ending. On that last session, I really count it as a celebration. So I want to reflect back on how far they've come from that first session to that last session, and tell them what they looked like when they first came in that room, and what you've worked on in all the sessions since, and make it a real celebration. Personally, I always get them a little card. When I was doing it in person, you can't do a card online now, but I used to get them a card and just say, it said, "I believe in you." It just said that on the front of it. So I used to give them a card and thank them. And if the school allowed it as well, I used to give them a bar of chocolate. But you have to be a bit careful there. So it's a real, you showing them that they've done some really good work on themselves, and then just reminding them that it's ongoing. And I always say to them, the door's always open. You don't want to feel that you've abandoned them. So I try and say, if the door's open, you need to be careful that there is always someone they can talk to, and they can contact us through whatever organisation. So through Worth It, to say, yeah, I'd like another session. So it's not a bang, slam, shut door. And then I think it's a really good time to reflect again for yourself of, remember how they came in that first session, and you reflect on how far they've come to that last session, because you will notice a massive change. And I think when you're coaching, you notice a change from the moment they walk through the door of a session to the moment they leave in that one session. But when you make the time to look back to the first one, and then, oh my goodness, look at them now, look at the things they're saying and doing now. Yeah, it's really important to celebrate that. I mean, we're doing positive psychology ourselves, aren't we? So you've got to reflect on your accomplishments and the real positives that you got out of that, and also a little bit of, what would I do differently next time? Yeah, because I always like it.
I think this happens almost before the first session. So it's important that you and the young person knows that this is going to end, that actually this isn't about you being there as support. You should make yourself obsolete in a sense, that they don't need you anymore. Getting to that point with them and making sure they know that, and they can identify that point where they feel they have that independence. I think it's important to have an element of detachment emotionally from the situation. So you might have gone through a whole process with them, which is really kind of moving, and you're really proud of everything they've achieved. And it might be a little bit sad to kind of say goodbye. But you know, we also know that there's going to be we're going to be working with more and more young people, and we need to be detached from that particularly, so that they can be independent. But if you do feel like you have any kind of like strong, oh no, I'm going to really miss them type of attachment, then again, it's like, get some support, get some coaching yourself to help you move through that and become even a better coach, and then move on, help someone else. You know, use what you've learned in that process to help more people.